Everybody put your hands where I can see them. This is a robbery. The kid couldn't have been more than 25, and his gun was already shaking in his hand. What he didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that the men sitting in booth 9 had buried brothers, survived wars, and stared down things far worse than two broke cousins with stolen pistols. They thought they'd picked an empty diner in the middle of nowhere. Instead, they'd pointed a gun at the last men on earth who would ever be afraid of it. Before we go any further, if you believe the most dangerous-looking men can carry the most honor, subscribe, and stay with me all the way to the end. And tell me in the comments what city you're watching from tonight so I can see how far this story travels. Leo Danton had counted the money in his head 11 times before they ever pulled into the lot, and every single time it came up short. "Say it back to me," Leo said. His hands were locked on the wheel even though the truck was already parked, engine ticking as it cooled. "Corey, say it back." Corey Baxter wiped his palms on his jeans. "We go in, we get the register, we get whatever's in the safe. We're gone in 90 seconds. And the people. We don't touch the people. Look at me." Leo turned in his seat. "We do not touch the people. You hear me? Nobody gets hurt tonight. We're not those guys. We scare them, we take the cash, we drive." "That's it." "That's it," Corey repeated, but his voice cracked on the second word, and Leo heard it. That crack was the first thing that went wrong, and Leo would remember it for the rest of his life. "You're shaking," Leo said. "I'm fine." "You're shaking, Corey." "I said I'm fine," Corey snapped, and then immediately dropped his head ashamed. I'm sorry, man. Toad said tomorrow. He said if we don't have it by tomorrow, He stopped. He couldn't make himself say the rest out loud. He didn't have to. Leo knew exactly what Hector Velasquez had said, because Hector had said it to him too, 3 days ago, with a smile and a cup of marfican and a voice as soft as a man reading bedtime stories. "You got a little girl, don't you, Leo Marisol? Pretty name. Be ashamed for a pretty little girl to grow up wondering where her daddy went." Leo had not slept since. "He's not gonna touch anybody," Leo said now. And it was as much a prayer as a promise, because we're gonna pay him tonight, and then we are done with that man forever. What neither of them understood, what desperate men never understand until it's too late, is that you don't get to be done with a man like Hector Velasquez. You only get to decide what it costs you to leave. Leo reached under the seat and pulled out the gun. He looked at it like it was something that had crawled in through the window. "These don't even shoot," he said. "Right. You said the firing pins are filed down." "That's what the guy told me." "That's what the guy told you." "I don't know, Leo. I gave him $40 for 2 pieces. I didn't take him to a gun show." Corey's leg was bouncing now fast, a jackhammer of nerves. Can we just go before I throw up?" And there it was. The second thing that went wrong. 2 terrified men, 2 guns, one of them wasn't even sure could fire, and not a single plan past 90 seconds and gone. Inside the diner was running the way it had run every night for 19 years. Brenda Acosta was refilling the napkin dispensers because the dinner rush, such as it was out here 40 miles from anything, had thinned down to the regulars and the lost. She was 56 years old, her feet hurt, and she had a grandson's birthday in the morning that she was going to be too tired to enjoy. "Harold," she called toward the pass-through, "you want me to put your plate up, or you eating standing up again?" "I'm eating standing up," Harold Bell called back. He'd been the cook here longer than Brenda had been the waitress, and the two of them had the easy bickering rhythm of people who'd spent 10,000 nights in the same small box together. "You leave my plate where it is. Your cholesterol's gonna leave you where you are." My cholesterol and me made peace a long time ago. Down at the counter, a heavy-set man in a wrinkled sport coat was working on a slice of pie he didn't need and a 4th cup of coffee he definitely didn't need. Dave Pruitt sold restaurant equipment, drove this stretch twice a month, and tipped like a man trying to make up for something. He was telling Brenda about his daughter's volleyball team, whether she wanted to hear it or not. And in booth 9, the big corner booth, the one nobody else ever asked for because it always seemed to be taken, 4 men sat with coffee and the kind of quiet that most people never notice, and a few people learned to fear. Brenda had stopped being nervous about them an hour ago. They'd come in on their bikes, sure leather and patches, and the whole picture of a thing your mother warned you about. But the one in charge had said, "Evening, ma'am," and meant it had ordered for the table, had told her to keep the coffee coming, and that they'd be no trouble. So far, they'd been no trouble at all. They talked low. They laughed once quiet. Mostly they just sat the way men sit when they've spent a lifetime learning that the loudest thing in any room is usually the weakest. Mike Callahan was 61 years old with gray in his beard and a stillness in him that took up more space than any sound could. He was halfway through telling a story when the bell over the door jangled. He didn't stop talking, but his eyes moved. So I told him, I said, you weld it twice or you weld it once, and do it right, and either way you're buying me breakfast. Declan Reed had already seen it. Declan saw everything. It was the thing the army had given him that he could never give back. He didn't turn his head. He just set down his coffee very slowly with both hands free. Two, Declan said under the story just for the table. Doorway, hands in their jackets. Mike kept talking. And that's the last time I let that man near a torch. The other two men at the table, Bishop and Tank, didn't look up either. They'd caught it the same instant. That was the thing about them that the kid in the doorway couldn't have understood if you'd drawn him a picture in that booth. Fear didn't move like it moved in other men. It didn't make them louder or faster or stupid. It made them still. Nobody move. Corey's voice tore through the diner like a flare, too high, too loud. The voice of a man trying to drown his own terror with volume. He had the gun out and up and swinging across the room in a way that made Leo's stomach drop, because that was exactly what Leo had said not to do. Hands where I can see 'em. Everybody. Brenda dropped the napkin dispenser. It cracked on the floor. It cracked on. Dave Pruitt put his hands up so fast he knocked his coffee over, and the brown spread across the counter and dripped, and he watched it spread because looking at the coffee was easier than looking at the gun. Okay, Leo said, coming in behind Corey, and his voice was the opposite of his cousin's low. Even the voice of a man trying to keep a runaway thing from going over a cliff. Okay, everybody just stay calm. Nobody's getting hurt tonight. We want the money, that's all. That's the only thing we want. On the ground, Corey screamed at Dave. Get on the ground. He's on the ground. He's on the ground. Leo put a hand on his cousin's arm. Hey, easy, easy. Behind the counter, Brenda found her voice, and to her own shock, it came out steady. The register's right here, honey. There's not much in it. It's a Tuesday, but it's yours. Just don't point that thing at me, please. I got a grandbaby turns 6 tomorrow. Open it, Corey said. I'm opening it. Open it faster. It's a 40-year-old register, baby. It opens how it opens. And here's a small thing, a thing that mattered more than anyone in that room knew. Yet even with a gun in her face, Brenda Acosta called him honey and baby because she was a mother and a grandmother. And her whole life had taught her that the most dangerous men in the world were usually just frightened boys who'd run out of other ideas. She looked at Corey's shaking hands and his wet eyes in some deep, exhausted maternal part of her thought. Oh, you poor, stupid child. What have you gotten yourself into? She had no idea how right she was. Leo's eyes were sweeping the room the way Corey's never could because Leo was the one who'd done time, and you don't do time without learning to read a space fast. Counter cook frozen at the pass. Booth by the window salesman on the floor, no threat. Waitress scared, cooperating fine. Corner booth. 4 men. Leo's gaze hit booth 9 and snagged the way your eye snags on the one wrong note in a song because they weren't reacting. Dave was on the floor. Brenda was shaking. Harold had his hands up at the pass-through, sweat on his lip. Everybody in that diner was doing what people do when a gun comes out. They were getting small, getting low, making themselves into something not worth shooting. The 4 men in the corner hadn't moved at all. They sat there with their coffee in front of them and their hands resting easy on the table, and they were looking back at him. Not down, not away, at him, calm as Sunday morning. Like he was a waiter who'd brought the wrong order, and they were deciding whether it was worth mentioning. A cold finger drew itself up the back of Leo's neck. You 4, he said, and he heard his own voice change, heard the authority leak out of it. Hands up, like everybody else. The oldest one, gray beard, broad as a door frame, a stillness coming off him like heat off a road, took a slow sip of his coffee, set the cup down, looked at Leo with eyes that had clearly seen a great deal and been impressed by very little of it. Son, Mike Callahan said, and his voice was almost gentle. You sure you walked into the right place tonight? Hands up. Corey wheeled toward the booth, the gun jerking in his fist. You deaf, I said, hands up. Nobody at the booth raised their hands. The man on the end leaned quiet, a coiled kind of quiet, simply turned his head a few degrees and looked at Corey the way a man looks at a dog that's barking on the other side of a fence. Declan Reed didn't say a word. He didn't need to. There was something in the flatness of his face that did more than any threat, and Corey felt it land in his chest like a stone dropping down a well. Leo, Corey said, and his voice had gone small. Leo, these guys they ain't scared, Leo. Why ain't they scared? Shut up, Leo breathed. Why ain't they scared? I said, shut up, Corey. But Leo's own heart was hammering now because he'd been asking himself the same question, and the answer was right in front of him, and he didn't want to look at it. 4 men, leather vests. And on the front of those vests, stitched in red and white patches, he'd seen before patches every man who'd ever spent a night in a county cell knew the meaning of the way you know the shape of a thing in the dark. His eyes found the bottom rocker, the territory, the name. And the air went out of Leo Danton like he'd been hit. Oh no, he whispered. Oh no, no, no. What? Corey was looking between Leo and the booth, the gun trembling, now panic climbing his throat. What is it, Leo? What? Put the gun down. What? Corey. Leo's voice was barely a sound. He had gone the color of old paper. Put the gun down, right now, slow. Don't point it at them. Do not point it at them. You're scaring me, man. What is wrong? They're Hell's Angels, Leo said. For a second, the words just hung there like Corey's brain couldn't find the shelf to put them on. Then they landed. Brenda behind the counter went very still, her hand frozen on the open register drawer. Harold at the pass-through mouthed something that might have been a prayer. Dave Pruitt on the floor made a small, involuntary noise like the air going out of a tire. And the 4 men in booth 9, they didn't move at all. They just kept watching, calm as ever, the way you'd watch the weather change, knowing exactly what was coming, in no particular hurry to meet it. Mike Callahan reached out and without breaking eye contact with Leo, turned his coffee mug a quarter turn on the table, the way a man does when he's settling in. There it is, Mike said quietly. Now you're catching up. Corey's gun was still up. His arm had locked. He was past hearing his cousin, now past reason, riding a wave of pure animal terror that had nowhere left to go. I don't care who they are. I got the gun. Me, I'm the one with the... You're the one with the gun, Declan agreed in a voice so even it was almost kind. And there's 4 of us. And you don't know if that thing even fires. He let that sit for half a heartbeat. But here's the part that ought to worry you, son. We do this all the time. You've done it once, tonight, for the first time in your whole life. He tilted his head. How's it going so far? Corey's face crumpled. Leo, he said, and it came out as a child's voice, the voice of the boy Leo had grown up beside the cousin he'd pulled out of the deep end of the public pool when they were 9 years old. Leo, what do we do? What do we do? And Leo Danton, who had walked into this diner 40 seconds ago, believing he was about to save his daughter's life, understood with sickening clarity that he had instead walked them both into something he could not control, could not threaten, could not buy his way out of, and could not run from fast enough. He thought of Marisol. He thought of Toad's soft voice and his soft smile. He thought, I am going to die in a diner in the middle of the desert, and she's going to grow up thinking her father was a thief. Mike, said the big one called Tanklo, not taking his eyes off Corey's gun hand. Kid's fingers on the trigger. He's going to do something dumb. He's not going to do anything, Mike said. You don't know that. I do, actually. Mike Callahan slid out of the booth. He didn't lunge. He didn't reach for anything. He simply stood slow and unhurried to his full height, and the size of him changed the whole room without him taking a single step. Both robbers flinched back. Corey's gun snapped toward him. Don't move, Corey shrieked. Don't you move, or I swear to God. You swear to God, what? Mike said. He wasn't angry. That was the worst part, the part Leo would never be able to explain to anyone afterward. The man wasn't even angry. He sounded tired the way you sound at a thing you've seen 100 times and hope not to see again. You'll shoot me, all right. Say you do. Say that thing fires and you put one in me. He spread his hands slow, easy. Now look around this room, son, real careful, and you tell me what you think happens in the half a second after that. Corey looked. He looked at Declan, who had not blinked. He looked at Tank, whose hands had quietly come up off the table and gone loose at his sides. He looked at Bishop, who was already half turned in the booth, wait forward, ready. He looked at four men who were not afraid of his gun, who had never once been afraid of his gun, who were simply waiting patient, certain terrible in their calm, for him to make the worst decision of his short and frightened life. And Corey Baxter, 25 years old and over his head, started to cry. "I don't want to do this," he sobbed, the gun still up, but his whole body shaking now, the words spilling out of him. Leo, I don't want to do this. I never wanted to do this. He's gonna kill us. Leo, Toad's gonna kill us if we don't." "Toad," said Mike Callahan. It was one word. He said it flat, no heat. But something moved behind his eyes when he said it, and Declan Reed's head came around an inch, and the temperature of the whole room shifted in a way that Leo felt in his teeth. Mike took one step closer. The gun was 3 feet from his chest now, and he walked into it like it was a screen door. "Say that name again," he said softly. "The one you owe." Leo's mouth had gone dry. He didn't understand what was happening. He didn't understand why these four men, who should have been calculating the fastest way to leave 2 robbers bleeding on a diner floor, had suddenly gone so very, very still at the sound of one name. Hector," Leo managed. "Hector Velasquez. They call him Toad. He loans money and we got behind, and he said he'd hurt my daughter. He said." Mike Callahan stopped walking. For a long moment, he didn't say anything at all. He just looked at the 2 trembling, broken, terrified men in front of him. Not the way you look at people who've pointed guns at you, but the way you look at something you recognize, something you've seen before, something that makes an old, cold anger turn over slow in your chest. Then he reached out calm as anything, and with 2 fingers he pushed the barrel of Corey's shaking gun gently down toward the floor. Corey let him. "Put it down, son," Mike said quietly. "You're not the man we're going to have a problem with tonight." His eyes came up and found Leo's and held them. "But I think you two just walked in here owing the wrong man money, and I think that might be the luckiest mistake you ever made." Behind the counter, Brenda Acosta let out a breath she'd been holding for what felt like an hour, and her hand finally came off the register drawer, and she looked at the 4 men in the corner booth like she was seeing them for the very first time. And out in the dark, 40 miles from anything, a phone began to buzz in Declan Reed's jacket, and he pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and said 3 words that made Mike Callahan's jaw go tight. "It's about Toad. Don't say his name out loud in front of strangers," Mike said, but he was already holding his hand out for the phone. "Give it here." Declan handed it across. Mike looked at the screen, and whatever was on it made the lines around his eyes go deeper. He pressed it to his ear. "Talk to me, Sully." Leo couldn't hear the other side. He could only watch Mike's face, and Mike's face told him nothing, which was somehow worse than anything it could have told him. Corey had sunk down onto the edge of the nearest booth, the dead gun hanging from his fingers, like he'd forgotten it was there. Brenda had come around the counter. Nobody stopped her, and she was crouched next to Dave Pruitt, helping the salesman up off the floor, with a hand under his elbow, murmuring, "You're okay, honey. You're okay. It's over." It was not over. Brenda would learn that soon enough. When Mike said into the phone, a pause. "Where?" Another pause longer. His jaw worked. "How many?" Tank had stood now, 2 drifting toward the front window, without seeming to the way a man moves when he wants to see the road, without letting anyone know he's watching it. Bishop had gone the other way toward the kitchen, glancing back at Harold with a small nod that somehow communicated, "Stay put, you're fine." Mike listened for a long 10 seconds. Then he said very quietly, "No, don't move on him yet. I got something here you're going to want to hear about first." His eyes came up and landed on Leo. "I got 2 of his." He hung up. The diner was dead silent. Even the old register had stopped its electric hum, or maybe it just felt that way. "Sit down," Mike said to Leo, "not a request." Leo sat. He set his own gun on the table slow, the way you set down something you're trying to prove you're done with. Mike looked at it and almost smiled. "That one fire." I don't think so," Leo said. "We bought him off a guy. He said the pins were filed." "They are," Declan said. He'd picked Corey's up off the seat without anyone seeing him do it. Popped something, looked, and set it back down. "Both of them. These wouldn't kill a fly." He looked at Corey, almost pitying. "You came in here to rob a room full of people with 2 paperweights, son." Corey made a sound that was half a laugh and half a sob. "We didn't want him to work. We just wanted We just wanted everybody to do what we said and nobody to get hurt, Mike finished. Yeah, I heard your cousin say it when you walked in. Nobody gets hurt tonight. He pulled a chair around, turned it backward, and sat folding his arms across the top of it, bringing himself down to Leo's level in a way that should have been a relief and somehow made Leo more afraid. That's the part that's got me curious. Real robbers don't say that. Real robbers don't care. So you two aren't robbers. His eyes narrowed, which means you're something I find a whole lot more interesting. You're cornered. Tell me about Toad, Mike Tank said from the window low. Headlights. Everyone in the room went rigid. Mike didn't turn around. How far? Mile out. Coming slow. One vehicle. One. Could be nothing. Could be a trucker. Could be, Mike said in the voice of a man who did not believe it was nothing. Bishop, lights. Bishop reached up and killed the front bank of fluorescents, and half the diner dropped into shadow. Brenda gasped. What are you? Ma'am, I need you and the gentleman to step back behind that counter and stay low, Declan said. And there was no asking, but there was something underneath it that made Brenda obey instantly, a flat, total competence that told her in her bones that this man had done this exact thing before in places far worse than this. Harold, you too, down. This is my diner, Harold said, but he was already crouching. And we're going to keep it your diner, Declan said. Down. Leo's mind was spinning. What's happening? Who's coming? Is it Toad's people? How would they even? Because your friend Toad keeps a real short leash, Mike said, watching the dark out the window over Tank's shoulder. Sully's been on him 3 weeks. Toad's got a man who follows his collectors. Makes sure his collectors don't skim, don't run, don't get robbed. He looked at Leo. You and your cousin went out tonight to get money for Toad. You think Toad didn't have somebody watching where you went? The blood drained out of Leo's face. He's been following us. Somebody has. Mike! Tank's voice had dropped another notch. It's slowing down. It's turning in. Everybody quiet, Mike said. For a long moment, the only sound in the diner was the soft crunch of tires on gravel outside getting closer and the ragged in and out of Corey's breathing, which he was trying and failing to muffle behind his hand. Then the tires stopped. A car door opened, closed. One set of footsteps unhurried crossing the lot. Leo realized he had stopped breathing entirely. He looked at Mike, and Mike had not moved. A single muscle was sitting in that backward chair, as relaxed as a man waiting for his eggs, and Leo understood that he was watching a man who simply did not get afraid, who had burned that part of himself out a long time ago. And the calm of it was the most terrifying thing Leo had ever been near. The bell over the door jangled. We're closed, Harold called out from behind the counter on instinct, and Declan shot him a look that could have stripped paint. A voice came back smooth and amused and unhurried. Funny, door was open. Lights are on out front. A pause. Footsteps, 3 of them into the room. And there's a truck out there I recognize. Belongs to a couple of boys who owe my boss a great deal of money. The voice took on a smile you could hear. Leo Corey. You back there, fellas. Don't be rude. Corey's eyes went wide and wild. He grabbed Leo's sleeve. That's Reyes, he whispered, barely a sound. That's Toad's guy. That's the one who, I know who it is, Leo breathed. Tell you what, Reyes called out, still pleasant, still strolling. I'm going to count to 3, and then I'm going to start figuring out which one of these dark little corners you're hiding in. And boys, if I have to come find you, I'm going to be in a much worse mood than I am right now. 1. Mike Callahan stood up. 2, you don't all need to count, Mike said, stepping out of the shadow and into the half-light calm as ever, his hands loose at his sides. We're all right here. There was a silence. When Reyes spoke again, the smooth was still there, but something underneath it had gone careful. And who are you? I'm the fella whose dinner you walked in on. Tank had drifted out from the window. Bishop from the kitchen. Declan stayed where he was, half in shadow, which was its own kind of message. 4 men, easy and unhurried, arranging themselves around the room without a word passing between them. And Leo watched Reyes's eyes move from one to the next, watched the man do the math, watched the moment the smile died on his face. You boys are a long way from a clubhouse, Reyes said. We get around, Mike said. This isn't your business. It wasn't, Mike agreed. Right up until your boss's name came out of these two kids' mouths, along with a story about a man threatening a little girl to collect a debt. He took one slow step closer. And see, that's a problem for me, friend, because that's the kind of thing I've got a personal interest in. Always have. Reyes's hand drifted just slightly toward the back of his waistband. Declan's voice came out of the shadow flat and quiet and absolutely certain. I wouldn't. Reyes froze. You've got a clean piece tucked in your belt and a clean shot at exactly nobody. Declan went on conversational, like he was reading off a grocery list. There's four of us, and you can't see two of us well enough to know where we are. You clear leather, you might get one shot off. You will not get two. So before your hand goes 1 inch farther, I want you to think real hard about whether Hector Velasquez pays you enough to die in a diner over a couple of broke kids who didn't even manage to rob anybody. Reyes's hand stopped. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved, and Leo could hear his own pulse in his ears, and he thought, this is it. This is where the shooting starts. This is where Marisol's daddy never comes home. And then Reyes slowly brought his hand back into view and held both of them up, palms out, and the smile came back. But it was a different smile now, the smile of a man buying time. Hey, he said. Hey, no need for all that. I'm just a guy doing a job. I find the boys, I bring them to Mr. Velasquez. That's the whole job. You want them? You want these two losers? He spread his hands wider, offering generous. They're all yours. I'll tell Mr. Velasquez the debt's been bought out. No harm, no foul. Everybody goes home happy. See, now I don't believe that, Mike said. I don't believe Toad lets a debt walk out the door because somebody asked nice. Do you, Leo? Leo shook his head mute. Tell him what Toad said he'd do, Mike said. Tell him to his man's face. Leo's voice shook, but he said it. He said if I didn't pay, he'd hurt Marisol, my daughter. She's 6. He said he'd make sure she grew up wondering where her daddy went. He looked at Reyes and something hardened in him for the first time all night. You were there. You were standing right behind him when he said it. You laughed. Reyes' smile flickered. Did you? Mike said softly. Did you laugh? It's just talk, man. It's how he does business. It's nothing personal. A 6-year-old girl, Mike said, is the most personal thing there is. He turned away from Reyes, then, which was its own statement, turned his back on a man with a gun, like the gun didn't exist, and crouched down in front of Corey, who was still huddled and shaking on the edge of the booth. Son, Mike said gently, look at me. How'd you boys get in with Toad's start at the start? Quick. Corey's words tumbled out in a flood relief and terror and shame all mixed together. Leo's wife, his ex, she got sick, real sick. Hospital. Wouldn't the insurance lapsed and they wouldn't keep treating her without, and Leo didn't have it and I didn't have it, and Toad was the only guy who'd lend without a credit check, and the interest it kept doubling, man, every week. It doubled. We paid and it never went down, it only ever went up. That's how the trap works, Declan said quietly. It's built so you can never get out. The robbery tonight wasn't a crime. It was a man drowning, grabbing at anything. How much? Mike said. All in. How much do you owe him right now tonight? Leo answered because Corey couldn't. $41,000. Reyes snorted from across the room. 43 as of midnight. Interest, fellas. And that small casual cruelty, that little correction tossed out like a man adjusting a tip, was the thing that changed the temperature in Mike Callahan's eyes from cold to something much colder. He stood up. He turned around. He looked at Reyes for a long moment. You know what I think, Mike said. I think you've collected from a lot of drowning people. I think you've stood behind that man while he threatened a lot of kids. I think you laughed every time because it was nothing personal. It was just business, and you went home and you slept just fine. He took a step. And I think the only reason you're still standing is that I've got use for you. Use for me, Reyes repeated warily. Yeah. Mike's voice was very even now. You're going to make a phone call. To who? To your boss, and you're going to put it on speaker. And you're going to tell him there's a man here who'd like a word about the Danton debt. Mike's eyes didn't blink. And then you're going to hand me the phone, and you're going to stand there real quiet, and you're going to learn something tonight about how the world's supposed to work. You're out of your mind, Reyes said, but his voice had lost all of its smooth. You don't know what Velasquez is. You don't know what he's got, who he's connected to, what he'll... I know exactly what he is, Mike said. I've put men like him in the ground for 30 years. He's a coward with a calculator who hurts people too scared to hurt back. He held out his hand, palm up steady as a table. The phone. For a moment, Leo was sure Reyes would go for the gun. He could see the man calculating. It could see the want in him. The pride of a man who'd never once in his life been spoken to this way and didn't know how to swallow it. But then Bishop shifted his weight just slightly off to Reyes' left, and Tank shifted off to his right, and Declan came one step out of the shadow so that Reyes could finally see all four of them at once, see the whole shape of the thing he was in, and the want went out of him like water out of a cracked glass. He reached into his jacket, slow-watched by everyone, and pulled out his phone, and his hand was shaking now, just a little, the first crack and all that smooth. He's going to remember this, Reyes said, scrolling to the number with a thumb that wouldn't quite hold steady. Whatever happens here tonight, Velasquez doesn't forget. You're making an enemy you can't afford. Son, Mike said, almost kind. I've been somebody's enemy my whole life. It's the one thing I'm real good at. He nodded at the phone. Speaker. Reyes pressed the call, tapped the speaker icon. And the ring filled the silent diner loud electric once, twice. Brenda had crept up to the end of the counter without anyone noticing, drawn forward by a thing she couldn't name, and Harold was beside her now, and Dave behind them, three ordinary people who'd come in tonight, expecting nothing more than pie and coffee and the long quiet drive home, and who now found themselves holding their breath at the edge of something none of them would ever be able to fully explain to the people back home. 3 rings, 4. And then a click, and a soft, pleasant, unhurried voice poured out into the room. A voice like a man reading bedtime stories, a voice Leo Danton had heard in his nightmares for 3 straight nights. Reyes, said Hector Velasquez, tell me you have my money, or tell me you have my boys. One of those 2 things had better be coming out of your mouth right now. Mike Callahan reached out and took the phone from Reyes' shaking hand. He brought it up close to his mouth. And when he spoke, his voice was soft and warm and friendly and absolutely without mercy. Hector, he said, you don't know me yet, but I'd like to talk to you about the little girl you threatened tonight. And I want you to listen to every single word because I am only going to explain how the rest of your life is going to go one time. On the other end of the line, in the long silence that followed, you could hear Hector Velasquez stop breathing. Who is this? Velasquez's voice had lost some of its silk. Not all of it. A man like Hector didn't give up the silk easy. Reyes, who is holding my phone. Reyes can't come to the line right now, Mike said. He's having a quiet moment, thinking about some choices he's made. He pulled the backward chair around again and sat unhurried like a man settling in for a long talk with an old friend. But you and me are going to talk, Hector. Just you and me. I don't know your voice, Velasquez said slowly. And I make it a point to know every voice that matters in 3 counties. So either you're nobody, in which case you've made a very large mistake picking up that phone, or you're somebody who's smart enough to stay invisible, which means you know exactly how dangerous it is to put yourself in front of me. A pause. Which one are you? Smart enough to stay invisible, Mike said. Until tonight. And what changed tonight? You threatened a 6-year-old. Velasquez laughed. It was an easy, genuine, untroubled laugh, and it made the hair stand up on Brenda Acosta's arms where she stood frozen at the end of the counter. Ah, the Danton girl. Is that what this is? Some white knight rode in off the highway to defend the honor of a deadbeat's daughter. The silk was all the way back now. Friend, let me educate you since you seem new to this. Leo Danton came to me, on his knees, begging. I did him a kindness no bank in this country would do. I gave a desperate man money when his wife was dying. And now he wants to cry to a stranger because the bill came due, his voice sharpened. Put Leo on. Let the man face the consequences of his own signature like an adult. Leo flinched. The words landed exactly where Velasquez aimed them, in the soft, shamed place where Leo had been living for months. Because part of him believed it. Part of him had always believed it was his own fault, his own weakness, his own failure as a husband and a father. Mike saw it land. Mike saw everything. Look at me, Leo, he said, lowering the phone for a second, covering it with one broad hand. You hearing that man? You believing him? He's not, Leo's voice broke. He's not wrong. I signed it. I knew it was bad and I signed it anyway. Whatever happens to me, your wife was dying. Mike said quietly. A man came along and charged you everything you had and everything you'd ever have for the privilege of trying to save her. That's not a deal, son. That's a vulture sitting on a fence post watching you bleed. His eyes held Leo's. You didn't fail anybody. You loved somebody, and a predator priced your love and sold it back to you. Don't you let him put that on you, not tonight, not ever again. Leo's eyes filled. He looked away, jaw working, and said nothing. But something in the set of his shoulders changed. Some weight that had been crushing him for half a year shifted just slightly for the first time. Mike brought the phone back up. Leo's not coming to the line, Hector. Leo's done talking to you forever, so you're going to talk to me. Then I'll make it simple for you, stranger, Velasquez said. And now the warmth was gone entirely, and what was left underneath was flat and reptilian and old. The debt is $43,000. I want it tonight. If I don't have it tonight, I will collect it the way I collect from everyone who tests me. And I promise you the way I collect is a thing that nice men with consciences like yours do not have the stomach to prevent. So, do you have my money, or do you have a funeral to plan? Mike didn't answer right away. When he spoke, his voice was almost gentle. Hector, how long you been doing this? Doing what? Lending to drowning people, doubling the number every week so it can't ever be paid, sending boys like Reyes to stand behind you when you threaten somebody's kid. A pause. How many people you got out there right now? Right this minute. How many families lying awake tonight because of a number you keep on a phone? A silence. Why, Velasquez said carefully. Would you ask me that? Because I'd like a count, Mike said, before we're done. You are not in a position to ask me for anything. Sully, Mike said. Tom, he didn't raise his voice. He just said the same name from the phone call earlier. And on the other end of the line, there was a sound, a small, sharp intake of breath that Hector Velasquez did not mean to make and could not stop. Leo watched Reyes go pale across the room. Watched the collector's eyes dart to the door to the windows, the look of a man suddenly recalculating everything. Velasquez's voice had changed. How do you know that name? Sully's been sitting on you for 3 weeks, Hector, Mike said pleasantly. On a favor. To me. I didn't even know your name a month ago. Sully brought you to my attention. Said there was a man out in the desert eating desperate people alive and getting fat on it, and Sully thought maybe that was something I'd want to know about, given my particular feelings on the subject. He let it breathe. And then would you believe it, 2 of your drowning men walked into the very diner where I happened to be having my dinner. Now, I'm not a religious man, Hector. But even I'll admit, that's the kind of thing that makes you stop and pay attention. Dave Pruitt, the salesman, had not said one word since he'd been helped up off the floor. But now, very softly, almost to himself, he whispered, My God, they didn't just stumble in here. This is quiet. Brenda breathed, gripping his sleeve. Listen, here's what's going to happen, Hector. Mike went on, and his voice had gone from gentle to something with iron underneath it. The Danton debt is closed tonight. You will never call this number, this man, his daughter, his cousin, or anybody connected to them again for as long as you live. You understand that part? Velasquez laughed again, but it was thinner now, a man reaching for an old confidence and not quite getting his hand around it. And if I don't agree, I didn't say agree, I said understand. There's a difference. Mike leaned forward. Because I'm not asking you to forgive a debt, Hector. I'm telling you a fact about your future. The Danton debt is gone. The only thing you get to decide tonight is whether the rest of it goes easy or hard. The rest of what? The rest of the people. Mike's eyes swept the room slow, and they landed on Leo and stayed there. See, here's the thing about a man like you. You think you've got 40 drowning people on the hook, and that's 40 separate problems, 40 people too scared and too ashamed and too isolated to do anything but pay. Each one of them thinks he's alone. That's the whole trick. That's what keeps the machine running. Everybody too ashamed to look up and see how many other people are standing in the same water. He paused. But you made one mistake tonight, Hector. You let 2 of them find out they're not alone. There was a long, long silence on the line. When Velasquez spoke again, the silk was gone, the warmth was gone, the flat reptile menace was gone, and what was left was something Leo had never once imagined he'd hear in that voice. Caution, the first thin edge of fear. What do you want? Velasquez said. And Mike Callahan smiled, and it was not a kind smile. There it is, he said softly. Now we're talking. He set his elbows on the back of the chair. I want a name and a number for every account you're running, every soul you've got in that book. And one by one, we're going to go through them, and you're going to make some decisions about which debts are real and which ones are just a vulture's arithmetic. You're insane. Do you have any idea what you're asking? That book is that book is a list of people you've been eating, Mike said. And yeah, I know exactly what I'm asking. I'm asking you to give it up. Tonight. Or what? A flash of the old defiance. You'll come for me. You don't know where I am. You don't know what I've got around me. Men walls, cameras, friends and places that would make your leather jacket laughable. You think you're the first hard man to threaten me over a phone? You're a voice. You're a stranger in a diner. The second I hang up, you're nothing. Tank, Mike said. Tank had been standing by the front window the whole time. Now he turned around and there was a small, grim smile on his face, and he held up his own phone screen out toward the room. Got a picture here, Tank said loud enough to carry across the line. Sully sent it about 4 minutes ago. White stucco house, red tile roof, black gate out front, little camera up in the corner of it, pointing at the driveway. There's a silver SUV parked sideways across the second bay, so you can't see the plate from the street. He read it off flat, mercilessly specific. That's a real nice place, Mr. Velasquez. Be a shame for everybody to know exactly where it is. The silence on the line this time was total. Leo watched Reyes sink slowly down onto a stool at the counter, his head in his hands, a man watching his entire world come apart in real time. Sully's outside your gate right now, Hector, Mike said quietly. Has been for an hour. He's a patient man. He's just waiting on a phone call from me. And the call I make to him depends entirely on the call you and me are having right now. He let that sit. So let me ask you again, and I want you to hear how reasonable I'm being, because this is the most reasonable I am going to be for the rest of this conversation. The Danton debt is closed. Do you understand that part? A breath, then strangled. Yes. Good. Now the rest. Mike's voice dropped. How many other people are in that book? A long pause, then very quietly, a number that made Brenda Acosta put her hand over her mouth. 63. 63 families, Mike repeated. And for the first time all night, something flickered across his face that was not calm. A deep, old banked anger, the kind that doesn't flare because it doesn't need to. 63. Out here in the middle of nowhere where nobody's looking, where there's no bank and no help and no other choice. And every one of them thinks they're alone. They signed, Velasquez said, but it was weak now, a habit more than a defense. They all signed. How much of that 63 is real money you actually put in somebody's hand? Mike said. And how much is interest you invented to keep them from ever climbing out? Silence. Hector. Most of it's interest, Velasquez admitted, and the words came out of him like teeth being pulled. The principles may be a fifth of the books. The rest is the trap, Mike finished. Yeah, I figured. He rubbed a hand down his beard, and when he spoke again, it was almost weary, the voice of a man who'd seen this exact ugliness too many times to be surprised by it, only sickened. Here's how it goes. You're going to close every account where the person's already paid back what you actually loaned them. All of them. Tonight. Reyes is going to sit right here and Sully's going to read me the book and you're going to confirm it one name at a time. The drowning people get to climb out. Every last one. That's, Velasquez's voice cracked. That's everything. That's my whole operation. You're asking me to burn down my entire... I'm asking you to give back money you stole from people who couldn't fight back, Mike said. And I notice you're still talking like you've got a choice. So let me clear that up for you. He stood. He walked toward the window where Tank stood, and he looked out into the dark in the direction of a house he'd never seen 40 miles away, where another man was sitting in a car outside a black gate waiting for a phone to ring. Sully's not a patient man because he's gentle, Hector, Mike said softly. Sully's a patient man because he's certain. There's a difference, and you've spent your whole life on the wrong side of it. You've been certain everybody's too scared to look up. And tonight in a diner in the middle of nowhere, two of your drowning men looked up. He turned back to the room. And so did I. On the line, very faintly, Hector Velasquez had begun to breathe fast and shallow. The breathing of a man whose certainty had just walked out from under him for the first time in years. And here's the part you really need to hear, Mike went on. I'm not gonna kill you, Hector. I'm not gonna burn your house down. I'm not even gonna let Sully knock on your gate long as you do the right thing in the next 20 minutes. You know why? Why, Velasquez whispered. Because a man like you is more useful alive and broke and afraid than dead and martyred, Mike said. Dead, you're just a story. Alive, you're a warning. And every other vulture in 3 counties is going to hear about the night Hector Velasquez gave back 63 books because 4 men in a diner asked him to. And they're going to think twice. His voice went flat and final. That's worth more to me than your life. Don't make me reconsider the math. For a long moment, there was nothing on the line at all. And then Leo Denton heard a sound he had never expected to hear, a sound that 3 days ago he would not have believed was possible, a sound that he would carry with him for the rest of his life as proof that the world could sometimes turn the right way up. He heard Hector Velasquez told the man who'd threatened his daughter, the man who'd haunted his sleep, the man who'd seemed as permanent and untouchable as the desert itself, begin very quietly to plead. Okay, Velasquez said. Okay, the Danton debt. It's closed. It's gone. It's done. I swear it. Just keep your man away from the house. There's people here. Family. Just keep him away. The Danton debt was always going to be closed, Mike said. That was never the question. Now we're going to talk about the brother 62. He looked across the room and his eyes found Leo. And there was something in them now that Leo had no name for, something that looked almost like an inheritance being handed down. Leo, come here, son. Leo got up on legs that didn't quite work and crossed the room. You came in here tonight to save your little girl, Mike said quietly, holding out the phone. You're going to leave here having saved 63 families you never met. He pressed the phone into Leo's hand. You're going to read the first name off Sully's list, and you're going to hear this man who threatened your child say out loud that they're free. Leo's hand closed around the phone, shaking, and he raised it to his ear, and somewhere out in the dark, a man named Sully began to read. First name Sully said, and his voice on the line was dry and level, a man reading a grocery list that happened to be made of human lives. Maria Delgado, borrowed $1,100 for a transmission. Book says she owes $9,400. She's paid in $14,000 over 2 years. Leo's throat closed up. He had to say it twice before the words would come. Hector, Maria Delgado. There was a silence on the line. Say it, Mike said quietly. Closed, Velasquez said, and the word came out of him like something torn loose. Maria Delgado, closed. Paid in full. Where she's done. You hear that? Mike said to the room. That's 1. 62 to go. Sully next. Eddie Cho, Sully read. Borrowed $2,000 for his daughter's braces. Book says $19,000. He's a school custodian. Paid in every Friday for 16 months. Eddie Cho, Leo said. Closed, Velasquez whispered. Louder, Mike said. Reyes is sitting right here, and I want him to hear every one. Reyes spent a year standing behind you while you squeeze these people. Reyes is going to sit here and hear you give it all back. Aren't you Reyes? Reyes did not look up from where he sat hunched at the counter, head in his hands. But he nodded a small broken motion, and something in the man had already changed. Leo could see it, the smooth gone out of him entirely, replaced by the dull gray of a man watching the only life he knew get dismantled in real time. And underneath that, buried so deep he'd probably never admit it, something that might have been relief. Eddie Cho, Velasquez said louder. Closed. 2, Mike said. Keep going. And so it went, name after name, for the better part of an hour. Brenda Acosta brought coffee around without being asked. It was the only thing she knew how to do with her hands when her heart was this full, and so she poured, going table to table, filling the cups of bikers and salesmen and broken collectors alike, and nobody told her to stop. Harold came out from behind the pass-through and stood with his arms folded, listening, and at some point Leo noticed that the big cook was crying, just standing there, with the tears running into his gray mustache, not wiping them like a man who'd given up being ashamed of them a long time ago. Because the names had stories, and Sully read every one. Rosa Aldama, Sully said, 71 years old, borrowed $800 to bury her husband. Book says $6,000. She's been paying it out of her Social Security. Misses meals to make the payment. The diner went very still at that one. Hector, Leo said, and his own voice had hardened into something he didn't recognize. Rosa Aldama, the grandmother, the one who skips meals. For the first time, Velasquez didn't answer right away, And when he did, his voice cracked. Closed, he said. She closed. Tell her he stopped. Tell her what Mike said sharply. Nothing. A breath. Tell her nothing. Closed. No, Mike said. You were going to say something. Say it. Tell her I'm sorry, Velasquez said. And it came out of him strangled and small. And whether it was real remorse or just a man who'd finally understood the size of what was crushing him, nobody in that diner could say. Tell her I'm sorry. Closed. Tank made a low sound in his throat. Bishop turned away. Even Declan, who hadn't shown one flicker of feeling all night, who'd talked a man off a gun like he was discussing the weather, even Declan's jaw had gone tight. Leo set the phone down on the table for a second because his hand was shaking too hard to hold it, and Mike put a hand on his shoulder, steady, heavy grounding. You all right, son? I keep thinking, Leo said, and he could barely get the words out. I keep thinking about all those people, all those nights, everybody lying awake thinking they were the only one, thinking it was their own fault, thinking they were too weak or too dumb or too... He stopped. That was me. That was me 3 hours ago. I came in here to rob a diner because I thought I was alone. I thought there was no other way. And now, Mike said. Leo looked around this room at Brenda with her coffee pot at Harold, with his tears at Corey, who'd stopped shaking and was sitting up now, watching his cousin, with something like awe at the 4 men in leather who'd turned a robbery into a reckoning without firing a shot. Now I know there was, Leo said. Pick the phone back up, Mike said gently. There's people still drowning who don't know yet. Let's go get them. So Leo picked the phone back up, and they kept going. Somewhere around the 40th name, the thing happened that Mike had been waiting for, the thing that Velasquez didn't see coming because men like Velasquez never did. His voice on the line, which had been getting flatter and more hollow with each name, surrendered suddenly sharpened. There, he said. Stop. That one's real. Daniel Pruitt. He borrowed $9,000 for a business that failed, and he's only paid back $4,000. That's a real debt. That's actual money I put in his hand. You can't tell me to. Sully, Mike said. That's square with the book. It does, Sully admitted. Pruitt's the real thing. $5,000 still owed on actual principal. And the room held its breath because here finally was the test. Here was the moment where you found out whether Mike Callahan was a man with a code or just another hard man with a phone and a list of people he'd decided to forgive. Mike thought about it for a long moment. Then Pruitt pays it back, he said. Leo looked up startled. What's actually owed gets paid, Mike said to the room as much as the phone. That's the difference between justice and revenge, son. We're not here to rob him. He nodded at the phone. Hector, Daniel Pruitt owes you $5,000 in real money. He's going to pay it. No interest from tonight forward. A fair number on a fair schedule like a human being. You take his $5,000 back over a year, and you say thank you for it, and you never threaten him, and you never send Reyes to his door. That debt's real, so it stands. But it stands clean. You hear the difference. I hear it, Velasquez said. Every account works that way from here out, Mike said. Anything past the principal gone. The principal itself, fair terms, no threats, no collectors, no interest games. You're going to run an honest book, Hector, for the rest of your miserable life because Sully's going to be checking. Aren't you Sully? Every month, Sully said pleasantly, like the rent. You're going to have a man looking over your shoulder forever, Mike said. And the first time you squeeze somebody, the first time you double a number, the first time anybody hears the word toad and gets scared instead of paying their fair share. Sully knocks on the gate, and the next conversation we have won't be on the phone. He paused. That's the deal. That's the whole rest of your life. You understand it? I understand it, Velasquez said, and there was no fight left in him at all. They finished the list as the night thinned toward morning. 63 names, 58 of them closed outright money already paid back many times over debts that had never been anything but a trap. 5 of them, like Pruitt, made clean and fair and real. When the last name had been read and answered, there was a silence on the line, and then Velasquez said in a voice that had aged 10 years in one phone call, Is that all of them? That's all of them, Sully confirmed. Then we're a breath, then it's done. One more thing, Mike said. What? Reyes. Mike looked across the room at the broken man at the counter. Your collector. He's done. He doesn't work for you anymore. He doesn't work for anybody who does what you do ever again. He's going to find honest work, and Sully's going to help him find it because, believe it or not, I think there's a man in there worth more than what you turned him into." He looked at Regis, and his voice softened just slightly. "That right, son, you done standing behind men like him." Reyes lifted his head. His eyes were red. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. "Then, Horse, I got a kid too. I never told nobody that. Toad don't know I got a kid." He swallowed. "I'm done." "There it is," Mike said quietly. Then back into the phone. "Reyes is done, Hector. You'll get yourself a new collector if you've got the stomach for it, but it won't be him. And whoever it is, Sully meets him first. We clear." "We're clear," Velasquez whispered. "Then we're done," Mike said. "Sleep tight, Hector. Think about Rosa Aldama eating a full dinner tonight for the first time in 2 years. Think about that every night for the rest of your life." And he reached over and ended the call and set the phone down on the table face down, gentle as setting down a sleeping child. For a moment, nobody in the diner moved. Then Brenda Acosta set down her coffee pot, walked across the room to where Mike Callahan sat, and to the visible alarm of all 4 bikers, threw her arms around the old man's neck and held on. Mike froze. Tank actually laughed a short, surprised bark. Bishop grinned. Declan almost smiled. "Ma'am," Mike said carefully, his arms held out to the sides like a man who'd forgotten what to do with them. "Ma'am, you don't have to." "You hush," Brenda said into his shoulder, fierce, her voice thick. My sister Connie, she's been paying that man for a year and a half. She borrowed $3,000 for her boy's surgery, and she's been too ashamed to tell anybody, even me. I only found out by accident." She pulled back, gripping his shoulders, looking him dead in the eye. "Was she on the list, Connie Vasquez? Was she on that list?" The whole room went still. Mike turned to the phone, but it was Leo who answered, because Leo had heard every name. Every single one had burned them all into himself like a brand. "Vasquez," he said softly. "Connie Vasquez. Borrowed $3,000. Books at 11. Closed." He looked at Brenda. "She's free, ma'am, as of about 20 minutes ago. She's free." Brenda Acosta put both hands over her face and sat down hard in the nearest booth and wept, and Harold came and sat beside her and put his big arm around his old friend and the salesman Dave Pruitt, who turned out, in a coincidence nobody could have scripted, to be no relation at all to the Daniel Pruitt, still on the books, just a man with a similar name and a long drive home, stood there with tears in his own eyes and said to no one, "I just came in for pie. I just came in here for a slice of pie." And here is where the night turned in a way that none of them understood yet, because somewhere in the last hour, something small and electric had been happening that Mike Callahan had not planned and could not control. Corey Baxter had been filming, not on purpose at first. He'd pulled his phone out somewhere around the 10th name half in shock, hands moving on their own, the way a man reaches for something to hold on to. He hadn't even meant to record, but he'd hit the button and propped it on the napkin holder and forgotten about it entirely. And it had caught all of it, the calm, the phone, the names, the grandmother who skipped meals, the old biker telling a loan shark that justice and revenge weren't the same thing, the waitress weeping over her freed sister. It had caught the whole thing. "Corey," Leo said when he finally noticed the little glowing rectangle leaning against the napkins, its red dot still blinking. "Corey, are you recording?" Corey looked at the phone like he'd never seen it before. I don't know. Oh God, I didn't mean to. He grabbed it. I'll delete it right now. I swear I wasn't trying to." "Don't," Declan said. Everyone looked at him. Declan had said maybe 40 words all night, and every one of them had landed like a verdict, and now he was looking at that phone with an expression nobody could read. "Don't delete it," Declan said again quietly. "Mike, think about what's on that thing." "I am thinking about it," Mike said, and his face had gone unreadable. "And my first thought is 63 people who'd like to keep their business private, and 4 men who don't much like cameras, and a fella named Sully who really doesn't like cameras." "Faces blurred," Declan said. "No names, no location, nobody's identity, just the talk, just the part that matters." He leaned forward. "Mike, how many other Hectors are out there right now? In how many towns, eating? How many people who think they're alone?" He let it sit. "You said it yourself an hour ago. The whole trick is that everybody thinks they're the only one. The shame keeps the machine running. He nodded at the phone in Corey's hand. That right there is the cure for shame. That's 63 people finding out at once that they were never alone. That's the next Maria Delgado in some other town seeing this and finally telling somebody. You want to dismantle one book tonight, Mike, or you want to scare every toad in this country into thinking twice? The diner was silent. Even Brenda had stopped crying to listen. Mike Callahan looked at the phone for a long moment. He looked at Leo and at Corey and at the weeping waitress and at the old cook and at the broken collector who just remembered he had a kid. He looked at his 3 brothers who were watching him, waiting the way they'd waited his whole life on him to make the call. Blur every face, Mike said finally. Every one. Mine included. No names, no town. Nothing that puts a real person at risk. You understand me, Declan? Not one soul on that video gets identified or it doesn't go out at all. Done, Declan said. And we don't post it, Mike said. We're not. He almost laughed at the strangeness of the thought. We're not going to sit around hashtagging ourselves like a bunch of fools. So somebody else puts it out, anonymous. It goes up, it does what it does, and it never traces back to anybody in this room. He looked at Corey. Can you do that, son? Can you make it so it can't come back on anybody? Corey, who'd never in his life been asked to do something that mattered, who, 3 hours ago, had been the most useless and frightened person in the room, sat up straight. My buddy strips metadata for a living, he said. Scrubs everything. Uploads through layers so it can't be traced. He owes me. I can make it so nobody ever knows where it came from. He looked down at the phone, then back up at Mike, and his voice steadied into something almost like purpose. I can make this clean. Then make it clean, Mike said. And then we're going to sit in this diner and we're going to watch the sun come up and we're going to let these good people open back up for the breakfast crowd like nothing happened. Because tomorrow, he glanced toward the front of the diner toward the dark that was just barely at its far edge, beginning to gray. Tomorrow, this is just a diner again. A diner where some folks had coffee. That's all anybody ever needs to know. But he was wrong about that, and he knew it even as he said it. Because the thing about a fire you light to warn people is that you don't get to decide how far it spreads. And 40 miles away, behind a black gate, Hector Velasquez sat alone in the dark with his phone in his hand, listening to the silence where his whole world used to be, beginning to understand that by this time tomorrow, every single person he had ever made afraid was going to know his name, and that not one of them ever again was going to be afraid of it. The video went up at 6:14 the next morning, and by noon it had 400,000 views. By the time Leo Danton drove back into town that afternoon, the truck, the same the desert, the same everything, the same except the man behind the wheel, it had 2 million. He didn't know that yet. He'd turned his phone off somewhere around dawn, sitting in that diner with a coffee Brenda wouldn't let him pay for, watching the gray at the windows turn to gold, listening to 4 men in leather talk quietly about nothing at all, the way men talk when the hard part's over and they're just glad to be breathing. He'd watched Mike Callahan eat a plate of eggs Harold cooked him for free, watched the old biker thank the cook like the meal was the greatest gift he'd ever received, and he'd thought, I will never understand these men, and I will never forget them. He'd asked Mike one question before they left. Just one. Why, Leo had said. Why us? You didn't know us. We pointed a gun at you. By every right, you should have. He couldn't finish it, and Mike had set down his fork and looked at him for a long moment, and the answer he gave was not the answer Leo expected. When I was about your boy Corey's age, Mike said quietly, I owed money to a man like Toad. Different name, same animal. And there was nobody in that diner for me, son. Nobody walked in and picked up the phone. He turned his coffee a quarter turn, that same slow gesture from the night before. I did things to pay that man back that I'm going to answer for someday. Things I can't take off me. Things that put men in the ground and put me in a cell and cost me a wife and the better part of my life. He looked up. Nobody picked up the phone for me. So I decided a long time ago that if I ever got the chance, I'd be the man who picks up the phone. A pause. You walked into the right diner, Leo, but I needed it as bad as you did. Don't ever think this was charity. You gave an old man a chance to settle a debt he's been carrying for 40 years. Leo had not known what to say to that, so he'd said the only true thing he had. I'm going to tell my daughter about you. Don't, Mike said, but he was almost smiling. Tell her she's got a daddy who came home. That's the only part that matters." So now Leo drove, and the closer he got, the harder his hands shook on the wheel. And it wasn't fear this time. It was a thing he hadn't felt in so long, he'd half forgotten its name. It was hope. He'd called his mother from a gas station payphone, his cell still all off, some instinct telling him to keep it off a while longer, and asked her to bring Marisol to the little park by the elementary school. He didn't say why. He couldn't have explained it. He just knew he didn't want to walk into that apartment where so many bad nights had happened. He wanted to see his daughter somewhere with sky over it. She was on the swings when he got there. Daddy, 6 years old, missing a front tooth, running at him across the grass with her arms already up, and Leo Denton dropped to his knees and caught her and held on, and he did not let go for a very long time. And when his mother came up behind them and saw his face, she stopped because she knew her son, and she could see that something enormous had happened. "Leo," she said carefully, "It's done, Ma." His voice broke completely. "It's gone, the money, the man, all of it. It's done. He looked up at her, holding his daughter against his chest, this little girl who had no idea how close she'd come to a story with no father in it. "We're free, Ma. We're actually free." His mother put her hand over her mouth, and then she put both her hands on her son's head like a blessing. And the three of them stayed there in the grass while a 6-year-old chattered about the slide and a frog she'd seen, and her loose tooth blessedly perfectly ignorant of all of it. Corey didn't take it the way Leo did. Corey fell apart. It hit him that same afternoon in the cramped apartment they shared all at once, and without warning, the full weight of what they had almost done. He sat on the edge of the couch with his hands hanging between his knees, and he started shaking, and then he started talking fast and broken, and he couldn't stop. "We had guns, Leo. We walked into a room full of people, and we pointed guns at them. There was a grandma in there, Brenda. She's got a grandbaby, she told us. She told us right while I was pointing it at her, and what if they'd been real, Leo? What if the pins weren't filed? What if Corey, he couldn't get his own name out right. What kind of person was I about to be? He looked up and his face was wrecked. How do you live with almost? How do you live with how close you came?" And Leo, who that morning had held his daughter in a park under an open sky, sat down next to his cousin and took his shaking hands in both of his. "You don't live with the almost," Leo said. "You live with the after. Mike told me something. He said the thing that makes a man isn't that he never gets desperate. It's what he does the second somebody gives him a door out." He gripped Corey's hands harder. "You filmed it, Corey. You didn't have to. You panicked, and you grabbed your phone, and you propped it up, and you caught the whole thing. And right now, right this second, that video is doing something. We don't even know how much yet. The worst night of our lives, and your shaking hands turned it into the thing that's going to save people we'll never meet." He waited until Corey looked at him. "That's not the man who almost did something terrible. That's the man who did something that matters. Both those men are you. You just get to pick which one you keep being." Corey cried, then the deep, ugly, cleansing kind, the kind a man only does a few times in his life. And Leo held on to him and let him, and outside the world kept getting louder. Because by that evening, the video had 11 million views. Nobody knew where it came from. Corey's friend had done his work, well-scrubbed, layered, anonymous, untraceable. There were no faces. Everyone was blurred. Mike's included 4 shapes in leather that could have been anyone. There were no names spoken that survived the edit. Declan had cut everyone, leaving only the shape of the thing, a calm voice on a phone, a list being read, debts being closed, a grandmother who skipped meals being told she was free, an old man explaining in a voice like gravel and grace the difference between justice and revenge. People could not stop watching it. It wasn't the danger. There was no violence in it, not one raised fist, not one shot fired. That was the thing that stunned people. That was the thing that made it spread to every corner of the country and then past it. In an age when everybody had learned to expect that power meant noise, meant cruelty, meant somebody getting hurt for a camera, here was 11 million people watching 4 anonymous men in a desert diner use the most dangerous reputations in America to do nothing but quietly, methodically set people free. The comments ran for hundreds of thousands of lines. People wrote about their own toads, their own debts, their own shame. "I thought I was the only one," a woman wrote, and 40,000 people replied, "You're not." A man in Ohio wrote that he'd been too ashamed to tell his wife about a loan for 3 years, and that he'd told her that morning after he watched the video, and that she'd held him and they'd cried, and they were going to figure it out together. Whoever you are, he wrote to four blurred shapes in a desert, you gave me my marriage back, and you'll never know my name. Brenda Acosta saw the video on her grandson's phone at his 6th birthday party. She'd made it after all exhausted running on no sleep, but she'd mobbed it, and she was sitting in a lawn chair watching the kids run around when her grandson held up the phone and said, "Grandma, you got to see this. Everybody's watching it." And Brenda Acosta looked down at her own blurred shape pouring coffee and listened to her own muffled voice asking about her sister Connie, and she had to get up and walk into the house so the children wouldn't see her cry. Connie called her that night. "Brenda," her sister said, and her voice was shaking. "Brenda, something happened. The man Hector, he called me. He said Connie could barely speak. He said it's gone, the whole thing. He said I don't owe anything. He said it's closed. Brenda, I've been so scared for so long. I've been paying him out of my... I didn't tell you. I didn't tell anybody. I was so ashamed." "I know," Brenda said softly. "I know, honey. I know everything." She closed her eyes. "And I need to tell you something, Connie. I need to tell you about a night I had at the diner, and about some men, and about what you don't ever have to be ashamed of again." Harold Bell never told the story to anybody. He'd been a cook for 41 years, and he'd learned that the best things that happen in a diner are the ones that stay in the diner. And so, when customers came in over the following weeks, buzzing about the famous video, asking each other where it could have happened, what diner, what desert, Harold just refilled their coffee and said, "It sure was something, wasn't it?" and kept his peace. But he kept booth 9 empty more often than the math justified. And when somebody asked him once why that corner booth always seemed reserved, the old cook just smiled and said, "Some seats you keep open out of respect," and changed the subject. Dave Pruitt, the salesman who'd just come in for pie, told the story constantly. To everybody, at every sales call, every dinner, every bar. Nobody fully believed him. It sounded too much like the video everybody'd seen, and they figured he was just claiming a piece of a famous thing. But Dave didn't care if they believed him, because Dave Pruitt had watched with his own eyes from a diner floor the night that proved to him that the world still had men in it who'd pick up a phone for a stranger. And a man who's seen that doesn't need anybody else to believe it. He just needs to have been there. As for Reyes the collector, the man who'd laughed behind Toad while he threatened a child, Sully made good on the promise. Found him honest work at a freight yard 2 counties over, where nobody knew his face from any video because his face had been blurred too. Reyes moved his kid to a better school. He never talked about the old life, but once a month, like clockwork, he drove past a certain white stucco house with a black gate slow, just looking, just making sure, because Mike had asked him to be one more set of eyes on Hector Velasquez, and Reyes, who had spent his whole life on the wrong side of fear, found that he liked very much being on the side that watched the watchers. And Hector Velasquez. Hector kept his word. He had no choice. Sully checked the book every month, just like he'd promised, sitting across from Velasquez at his own kitchen table, while the loan shark read out his accounts like a boy reciting homework. The 5 real debts got paid off fair and clean, and Velasquez took the money and said thank you every time, because Sully was sitting right there. And thank you was now a thing Hector Velasquez had to say. He never recovered the operation. How could he? Every drowning person in 3 counties had seen the video. Nobody was afraid of Toad anymore. The name that had once made families pay out of their grocery money now made them square their shoulders, because they all knew now the one thing he'd spent his whole career, making sure they never learned that there were more of them than there was of him, and they were never ever alone. He became exactly what Mike said he'd become. A warning. The cautionary tale the other vultures told each other. You remember what happened to Toad out in the desert? You remember he gave back 63 books in one night over a phone call, and the next man, the one about to double a number on some desperate family, would think about it and hesitate, and sometimes, not always, but sometimes would not make the call. That was the fire. That was how far it spread. You don't get to decide how far it spreads. The 4 men went back to their lives, whatever those were. They didn't do interviews because nobody could find them. They didn't claim the video because the video had no name on it. They were to 11 million people, and then 100 million people, and then a number nobody bothered counting anymore, simply the men in the diner, four blurred shapes who'd proven that the most feared reputation in America could be a shield instead of a weapon, that discipline was a kind of power most people had never seen, that you could stop a great deal of evil in this world without ever once raising your voice. Mike Callahan died 3 years later of a heart that had simply done enough. He was an old man by then, and most of the people at the funeral were brothers in leather, and not one of them said a word about a diner because that wasn't the kind of thing you said out loud. But Leo Danton was there. Nobody quite knew how he'd found out or how he'd known he'd be welcome. He stood at the back in a borrowed jacket, and he'd brought his daughter, who was 9 now, and didn't fully understand why her father had driven 6 hours to stand at the funeral of a man he said he'd only met once. After it was over, Declan Reed found him at the edge of the gathering. The ex-military man, older now, too gray, coming in. "You're the kid from the diner," Declan said. "Yes, sir." Declan looked at the girl, then back at Leo. He talked about that night sometimes. Toward the end, said it was one of the few he wasn't sorry about. A pause. Said it squared something for him. Leo's throat tightened. "It squared something for me, too." Declan nodded slowly. Then he crouched down to Marisol's level, this hard, quiet man who talked a panicking robber off a trigger without raising his voice, and he said, "Your daddy ever tell you he's a brave man?" Marisol shook her head shy. "Well, he is," Declan said. "Bravest thing a man can do is let somebody help him, and then turn around and spend the rest of his life helping back. You remember that about your daddy." And Leo Danton stood there in a borrowed jacket at the funeral of a stranger who'd saved his life, holding his daughter's hand, and he understood at last the full shape of what he'd been given that night in the desert. Not just his freedom, not just his life, but a way to live the rest of it. Because in the 3 years since Leo had become the man who picked up the phone, he'd talked 4 different families out of 4 different traps. He'd sat with Corey, who ran a small, honest garage now, who'd never touched another gun, and they'd help people the way they'd once needed help quietly with no cameras, asking nothing back. The debt Mike Callahan had carried for 40 years, he'd handed to Leo in a diner over a plate of free eggs. And Leo was going to carry it the rest of his life. And someday he'd hand it to somebody else. That is what really happened that night in the Mojave Desert. Not a robbery, not a viral video. A chain one man picking up the phone for the next, stretching back further than anybody could see and forward further than anybody could follow. Toad built a machine to make people believe they were alone, and 4 men in a corner booth proved in a single night that not one of us ever has to be. And the footage that shocked the internet was never really about the men in the leather or the loan shark or even the guns that couldn't fire. It was about the oldest truth there is, the one the whole world keeps forgetting and keeps having to learn again, that real power never has to shout, that mercy can be the hardest discipline a man ever masters, and that the strongest person in any room is almost always the one who chose when it would have been so much easier not to pick up the phone for somebody who had no one else to call.